Tim and Marilyn and Judy. Good evening, church. You have a good afternoon? Yeah. Glad you're here. We are in Hebrews chapter 11. The first 3 verses is our text for this series. I'm trying to finish this up tonight and start something new next week. Hebrews 11, the first 3 verses in the NIV say, "Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what is visible." The debate between science and religion, faith and evolution, creation and evolution, faith and empiricism, however you want to frame it, has been raging for all of our lifetimes and longer, and probably isn't going to stop anytime soon. So it's going to be part of living a life of faith while we're walking the face of the planet, probably our children and grandchildren as well. So we've been looking some at that on Sunday nights, but especially with regard to a debate between Bill Nye, the science guy, and Ken Ham, the Answers in Genesis man, that happened back in February. And I want to draw some conclusions from that tonight. On your sheet that you have, we've already filled in the first sentence, and I said that we should not force the Bible to say more than it does. A lot of people feel like that Ken Ham and others may be doing that. I don't want to pass judgment on him. I like him a lot. I think he comes out with a lot of neat things, and he's definitely good for the debate. But a lot of people were critical of Ken for the way that he managed the debate with Bill Nye. He could have at least spent more time on some other issues. I think we could at least say that much about Ken, because his debate with Bill Nye pretty much devolved into a debate about the age of the earth. Is the earth 6,000 years old, as he thinks, or is it 4.5 billion years old, as Bill Nye thinks, or are they both wrong? And what I have suggested in our previous sessions is that we want to be careful that we don't try to make the Bible say more than it really does. And the issue of the age of the earth brings up another question that I want to at least introduce tonight. We may come back to this later. Somebody has asked, why in the world would some people be so adamant about making the world 6,000 years old? Why is that so important to them? Why are they so passionate about the earth being young rather than being old? There are some interesting questions that come up related to that, and they have to do with animals, of all things. A lot of very interesting questions about animals, enough of them that maybe we will take some time and look at them again in the future. One of the questions is, did animals eat meat before the fall? Were they herbivores or were they carnivores? And that gets into a fascinating discussion. The scientific evidence, which seems to be overwhelming, if you follow the line of reasoning, is that animals have eaten meat for a long time. They've eaten one another for a very, very long time. Viruses have been around for a very, very long time, and very small creatures have been killed by the viruses, and very small creatures have been killed by medium-sized creatures, have been killed by larger creatures for a very, very long time, and they have the equipment to do that. Now, Ken Ham has some answers to that. He doesn't believe that that's true. He believes that animals only began to eat each other at the fall. So that's a conflict between at least Ken Ham's reading of the Bible and what science, at least at the moment, believes. Notice I'm hedging my bets, because everybody can change their minds in these debates, and that's one thing that we have to remember. But if animals did eat meat before the fall, then does that mean that the Bible is wrong when it says that death entered into the world through Adam in Romans? If they didn't eat meat before the fall, then how did they suddenly become meat eaters from these gentle, docile creatures that God created not to eat meat? Did they instantly become meat eaters the moment that Eve took a bite of the apple? And if so, how did they transform? And if they didn't instantly do that, how did they transform? How long did it take? And did they evolve at that point? And if they evolved at that point, and those of us who don't believe in evolution, then how could we then say that we believe in evolution on one hand, but we don't believe in evolution on the other hand? So it gets a little wacky pretty quick. But it is an interesting argument, and it's one where we need to go back and make sure that we've carefully read the Bible and not taken a stand on a doctrine that is traditional, that's simply been handed down to us and never explained, and we took it and agreed with it, and never really took the time to read the Bible and ask ourselves, is this really what the Bible says? Let me ask you, does the Bible say that animals ate meat before the fall? Anybody want to take a stab at that? Is there a verse that we can go to help us with that? I see a lot of these kind of looks. So apparently you're expecting me to give you the answer, huh? Well, there is a verse that we can go to in Genesis, if you want to flip around in your Bible tonight. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 30, talking about the creation. God says, "And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds of the air, and all the creatures that move on the ground, everything that has breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." And it was so. What does that verse tell us? It tells us that animals ate plants. Does it answer our question? I don't know. If you take that verse to mean that they didn't eat each other, then that's a classic argument from silence. And arguments from silence are very dangerous and slippery. They could be right, they could be wrong. Here's what I try to do, and I'm sure I fail. When the Bible is silent, I am silent. And I know I fail at that sometimes. It's just too tempting to reach out and grab something. Oh, but it's got to be this way. It doesn't make sense to me if it's not this way. But really what we need to do is ask ourselves, what does the Bible say? Let me ask you this one. What does the Bible say about death entering into the world when Adam and Eve sinned? Anybody? Does anybody know what book of the Bible that we need to look at? Does anybody know which testament in the Bible we need to look at? You would guess the Old Testament, wouldn't you? But actually, in this particular case, we can find the answer in the New Testament. Is that warming up some brain cells for anybody? What book of the New Testament? Stay with me long enough and I'll turn you all into theologians. The book of Romans, of all places. The book of Romans tells us that when Adam sinned, that death entered into the world. Look at it though with me. It's Romans chapter 5 and verses, there's two verses. Look at verse 12, Romans 5:12. And the NIV says, "Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, and in this way death came to all men because all sinned." What does that verse tell us? Death came to men. You're included, ladies. The word anthropos in the New Testament is usually inclusive.
Well, was it saying death or spiritual death?
That's a good question too, Charles. See, it just continues to get more and more fascinating because Adam was told that the moment that he ate that apple, he would what?
He would surely die.
He would die. Did he fall down and die the moment he ate that apple? Not physically. And the way that most conservative theologians get around that or answer that question is they say what?
Spiritual.
That he died spiritually. And there's no doubt that some sort of spiritual death happened at that moment because he had just disobeyed God, and there was an estrangement between Adam and Eve and God from that moment forward. He was hiding from God from that point forward. But there may be more truth to the physical death part than we think. It may be that before that very moment, Adam and Eve not only had access to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they also had access to the tree of life. And it may very well be that whatever that tree of life is or was, is what would keep them immortal. So that the moment they stopped, because they were kept out of the garden, once they sinned, they were expelled from the garden specifically for what reason? What did God say? So that they would stay away from the tree of life and not live forever. That's exactly right. So there's some connection between eating from the tree of life and living forever. And the moment they ate that apple, or I keep saying apple, but we don't know that it's an apple. I'm sorry. I'm saying something the Bible doesn't say. See, there, it's so easy. The moment they ate that fruit, kumquat, whatever it was, the moment they ate that fruit, they were expelled from the garden. They could no longer have access to the tree of life. Surely they began to die physically at that point. But all of our questions are not answered there. We need to be careful to say only what the Bible says. And somebody, was it Sam just a moment ago, pointed out that this verse says that death came to man. Silence about the animals. It doesn't answer our question. I wish it did. I want the answer. And then if you look down at verse 18, consequently, same chapter, same book, just as a result of one trespass was condemnation for all, what? Men. So also the result of one act of righteousness was justification that brings life for all men. Why is the young earth so important to the young earthers? I think one of the reasons that a lot of Christians want the earth to be young, and maybe it is, I don't know that it isn't, is out of fear of evolution. Because evolution, we have been told, only works with vast periods of time. If you shorten the period of time, the whole thing collapses. Now, I would say to you the whole thing collapses anyway, but if you shorten the period of time, you just completely throw evolution out of the courtroom. It's gone. It's gone completely. But if you allow these vast periods of time, then apparently to some there's a possibility. But here's what's interesting about the young earth, old earth. The young earth, the idea of an old earth actually goes back to theologians hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Has anybody ever heard of a guy named St. Augustine, or Augustine, depending on how you like to say his name? Back in the 400s, he believed that the earth was what? You want to take a guess? Old, ancient. Is that surprising? So here's a major theologian in early Christianity who believed that the earth was ancient long before Darwin ever came along. And so he didn't believe that the earth was ancient to try to accommodate Charles Darwin's theories of evolution. He simply believed that the earth was ancient. The young earth was never given as a creed in the Bible. All the creeds that were written in Christianity along the way never included anything about the age of the earth. They included the statement that God made the heavens and the earth, but nothing about the time. Apparently, only recently has this become a battle, and probably because of evolution and some other things that have come about. Stephen C. Meyer, the director of the Discovery Institute's Center for Science and Culture, is one of the leading voices in the intelligent design movement, which is a movement trying to point out that evolution just doesn't work. Scientifically, it doesn't work. And after the debate, he said, Ken Ham has made a very significant mistake by focusing on that subsidiary issue and giving Darwinists a pass on the more significant issue that there is evidence for design. What I want to get across to you on this Earth age thing is, first of all, I don't know. And I don't think I have to know. I'm not sure the Bible tells me how old the Earth is. There's no verse in the Bible that says the Earth is X amount of years old. We've already talked about that in here, so if you want to hear what I had to say about that, go back a week or two and listen to it. But that's not the issue. It's apparently not the issue in the Bible, or it would have been stated clearly and it would have been repeated. So what the Bible sees as important is stated clearly and it's repeated. Those are the issues in Scripture. And so to waste a lot of time arguing about the age of the Bible, especially when you have an opportunity like Ken Ham did with Bill Nye, with so many people listening, is questionable. There may be a time to argue those issues and to try to work through them and figure them out, but it's not the main point. A lot of people wish that Ken Ham had talked more about evolution and pointed out some of the problems with evolution. There's no way that something can come from nothing. How does non-life come from life? How does non-consciousness produce consciousness? How do non-rational beings produce rational beings? Or are we not really rational beings and we just are fooling ourselves? It raises a lot of interesting questions. Ken Ham made an interesting distinction in the debate between the two kinds of science, observational science and historical science. A lot of what he teaches is based on that. It's a fascinating subject. You can go to his website and let him teach you that. But he pointed that out over and over again, and Nye didn't like that. Nye pointed out that he used the example of CSI. Anybody ever seen CSI? Wow. Like 3 or 4 people. I thought that would, okay, help me out here. What does CSI stand for?
Crime scene investigation.
Crime scene investigation. Nye pointed out that when they show up on a crime scene, they don't make a distinction between historical science and observational science. They observe the crime scene and they draw conclusions about what happened historically based on the evidence that they have there in front of them. And he's absolutely right. He's absolutely right. But maybe without even realizing it, he brought up an issue that would trip him up if Ken Ham would follow through on it. The crime scene investigation points out that everybody understands this thing called intelligent design. Because when the investigators show up on a crime scene, their minds are open. If there's a death involved, their minds are open to at least 2 possibilities right off the top. And that's one of the first questions that has to be answered. What is that? When there's a dead body, the first question that has to be answered is what? Is it a murder? Or is it a natural death? In other words, was there an intelligence involved that caused that death? Or did natural causes take that person's life? Now, this is a great example, one of very, very many, that demonstrates that in everyday life, scientifically, we believe in intelligent design. If the crime scene investigators show up and there's a dead body lying on the floor and he's got blood on his fingertip, and as he died, he scratched out the letters J-I-M in blood on the floor, and his business partner is named Jim, and people have heard his business partner, Jim, threaten to kill him, would they say, oh, look what natural causes caused to occur, how did that happen? Of course not. They recognize specified, complex information. Specified, complex information, and they immediately assume and never even question their assumption that there are intelligent causes involved here. That's exactly the argument that's raging right now in the biological world between creationists and atheists, evolutionists. Now, I have to admit that some creationists believe in evolution, but they believe that it was a process guided by God. That's a separate issue. This whole thing gets complicated fast, doesn't it? But let's go back to just the creationists and the atheists. What we've discovered over the last 50 years is the DNA that makes us who we are can best be described as what? It's a word that starts with the letter I. Information. It's information. It has a It has letters, it has a vocabulary, it has a grammar. And not only do we have DNA with the information on it, but we have RNA that reads the information, understands the information, and carries out the information. It is the most complex information system that anybody has ever seen in the world. It makes Microsoft look like kindergarten. It's unbelievable in its complexity. And who in their right mind would see J-I-M scratched out with a fingertip and say that happened accidentally? This is exactly the argument that's going on. And scientists do not want to talk about intelligent design because it is so powerful. What about evolution? What's the evidence for evolution? There's plenty of evidence for evolution if you believe in small changes in life forms that adapt to environments. But when you start talking about evolution where dirt becomes a man in however many millions of years, then we have a problem. A lot of problems. And it's been demonstrated over and over again. I'll just give you one example. E. coli is something that's been studied quite a bit. There are 7 generations of E. coli every day. And so over the last few years, E. coli has been studied for 30,000 generations. 30,000 generations. How much evolution do you think has happened in E. coli over the last 30,000 generations? None. In fact, if anything, it's devolved. In fact, what we're finding is that a lot of the changes in biology are not evolution, they're devolution. Not meant to sound like the devil. Devolution. Things get simpler. They cast off complex pieces of DNA and simplify. They get leaner and meaner, if you will. They don't get more complex. Ham, in his rebuttal, he did get into this a little bit, so don't get me wrong. It's not that he completely left this subject out. But he said, show me an example of some new function that arose that was not previously possible from the genetic information that was already there. I would claim that there is no such example. What was Nye's answer? He had none, because there is none. And that's important to understand. Bill Nye could not answer that question because there is no answer to that question. There's no example of more complex being. Why is it that atheistic scientists are so upset by the power of intelligent design? If you don't think they are, watch Ben Stein's video, No Intelligence Allowed. You'll be stunned at the politics that are involved in this. It's really, I know a little bit about it, but when I saw the video, it was shocking to me at how political this thing has become. If you talk about intelligent design in the academia today, you're out the door. You're done. If you try to publish something about intelligent design, the leaders, the priesthood, if you will, of academia will come in and they will surround the publication until they succumb and they decide not to publish. They will not allow anything to be published about intelligent design. And what's ironic is the scientific community right now is listening to the heavens. Looking for what? What are we looking for? S-E-T-I. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence. SETI. S-T-E-I. S-E-T-I. And it's based on the understanding that we can hear something that is what? Intelligent. It's based on the understanding that when we listen to the universe, we can tell the difference between natural sounds, things that are just caused by pulsars or whatever, and things that would be caused by intelligent beings. By the way, how many intelligent beings have we found out there? We're still looking though, and you're paying for it, by the way. I just want to keep reminding you of that. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. Number 2, atheists, like theists, are committed to a particular worldview. In this debate, Nye is a great debater. He did a great job just at the debating part of it. And one of the things that he did is he continually pinned Ken Ham to the wall and said, the worldview of Ken Ham. In the worldview of Ken Ham. In Ken Ham's worldview, trying to make him look foolish and make himself, elevate himself into up to the reasonable man. He has no worldview. He simply looks at the evidence, draws the proper conclusion, and he's a scientist. Ken Ham, on the other hand, has a worldview that guides what he does. Is that true? Does Bill Nye not have a worldview? What do you think? Well, actually, Bill Nye does have a worldview, and atheistic scientists have a worldview. They mask it well, or they try to, but we need to be aware that there's a worldview behind atheistic science that they are defending. This is one of the first times I noticed Nye about a year or so ago was when a video of his went viral. It showed up on Christian Post, and he was very harsh, especially against homeschoolers, but against any Christian raising their children and teaching them about creation. He said, if you want to deny evolution and live in your world that's completely inconsistent with everything we observe in the universe, that's fine. But don't make your kids do it, because we need them. We need scientifically literate voters and taxpayers for the future. We need people that can. We need engineers that can build stuff, solve problems. That normally wouldn't bother me, but in today's political climate, it concerns me when people say things like that, because it makes me wonder what kind of next move there would be. We've already seen in some countries that Christians who try to homeschool their children are told that sometimes what? You can't do that. The government says you can't do that. We don't like what you're teaching your children, and so we will, in some cases, what? Shocking, but take the children away. Can that happen in the United States of America? I hope not. But if we're silent, what's that, Kevin? It's already happening. So we need to be aware of that. Nye's contention is that if you teach a child that God created the universe, they can never be a scientist. He said that. He said that over and over and over again. He said, if you believe the way this man does, Ken Ham, then you turn your brain off and you'll never be productive, and you're going to cause our country to collapse and fall behind the rest of the world technologically. What evidence does he have for that? One of the things that Ken Ham did a great job of in the debate is he presented these men with PhDs, men and women who had PhDs in the scientific community, who were teachers, who have invented things that are being used today, and they believe. They believe the same way Ken Ham does. They're not just Christians, they're young earth Christians. And they are contributing to what's happening. They're engineers, they're scientists, they're producing new technology. The fact is, if we look at the evidence, there are more Christians have contributed to science than atheists by 1,000 times. Because at this point in the West, almost everything that we've come up with, up until maybe 50 years or so ago, has been produced by whom? People who believe in God. Let's just say theists and atheists. Theists have driven science for hundreds and hundreds of years. In fact, some people would say that one of the reasons, and I believe they're right, one of the reasons that the West has excelled from the rest of the world in technology and science is because of our belief in God. Because we start out with the understanding that the world makes sense, and we can go out and observe the world, and we can make sense out of it because a God who is intelligent made the world, and so the world makes sense to people who have intelligence. It's not just by accident. How do you make sense out of something that is an accident? It's ironic that actually those who are evolutionists have caused a problem with science. I'll give you an example. This is really stunning. They're saying that Christians are holding back science. There's no evidence for that whatsoever. But what's happened within the last 10 years or so is after the human genome was mapped completely, and DNA is, of course, still being studied, and probably will for who knows how long, but large sections of the DNA in our bodies were apparently found to be unused. And so they were labeled. Anybody hear this? Anybody know what I'm talking about? What did they label those sections of DNA? Y'all don't read this stuff, do you? It's called junk DNA. Well, it was. It was called junk DNA. And the scientists said, see, I told you. See, we've evolved. And as we evolve, parts of our DNA were not needed anymore, and they're vestiges. They're just leftovers. Here's the DNA over here that's being used. Most of our DNA is junk. It's just left over from millions of years of evolution. And they stopped studying it. Guess what happened? They made a huge, huge error. They held up science. Because a Christian would look at that and say, I don't think so. I don't think God would put together a strand of DNA and only use a small portion of it, and the rest of it would be useless. I think we need to study it a little bit more and find out why God put all of that, what you're calling junk DNA, into our DNA. And sure enough, it turns out that all of what they call junk DNA is actually the part that turns everything off and on when this DNA over here tells it to do so. And so if they had come in and said, here's junk DNA, we don't need it anymore, let's cut it off, guess what? Everything would stop working. It would be death. So ironically, it turns out that there's more evidence that the evolutionists are the ones that are holding up science. I'll give you another example, and this is high schoolers and people going to college. I want you to listen very carefully to these two examples real quickly. In textbooks still are these drawings of fetuses. They're hand-drawn, and they show the fetus of several different animals next to the fetus of a baby. And they're all drawn so that they look almost exactly the same. And they say, see, look, here's evidence for evolution. Because we all start out exactly the same. And then we develop differently in the womb. And that's evidence that we have a common ancestor. That is so bad. Because since then, now we have the scientific capability to go into people's bodies. I don't want to talk about that too much, but they do that. And take pictures of things inside of us and animals. And so we now have actual photographs of the fetuses that they drew pictures of, and guess what? Man, they look different. They look completely different. You look at those drawings, and then you look at the photographs, and you want to go, foul, 15 yards, go back, science. But it's not all scientists that are doing that. And I'm not talking against all scientists. Science is good. Atheistic science, you have to keep an eye on. Because they'll do some funny things. Back in 1953, there was a couple of fellows, a chemist, Harold Urey, and you'll hear this one too. Harold Urey and his doctoral students, Stanley Miller, who wanted to try to figure out how life started from just the basic elements in the atmosphere of Earth. And so they created a chamber where they put in hydrogen, water, methane, and ammonia. And they boiled the water, and they applied an electric discharge. It didn't work, so they changed everything up. It didn't work, they changed everything up over and over and over again. They changed everything up, and finally, they came up with amino acids, and they went, aha, see, here we go, we've got it. This is how life started. In the prebiotic soup, the ooze, lightning hit or radioactivity came in and it sparked, and the amino acids came together, and we were off and running. We were off to the races. And what's really disappointing is this experiment from 1953 is still, to this day, used in textbooks. I went on PBS's website, one of my favorite groups of liberals. I listen to them all the time. They keep me up to date on what the liberals are thinking. And on their website, if you look for it, you'll find a nice article on Urey and Miller's experiment with glowing terms. It talks about what a wonderful thing it is and how it helped our understanding of the original springing into life of life on the earth. The only problem is that the experiment has been debunked since then. One of the big problems was that they did it without oxygen, and now scientists believe that Earth was oxygen rich, and so it completely cancels out the experiment. There are other things about it that are problematic that are scientific, and if you like science, you can go read about it to your heart's content. But here's the thing. If that experiment really does prove that the basic building blocks of life can spring into existence that easily, then why is it today that scientists, when they're asked the question, how did the first self-replicating biological life form spring into existence, that their answer is, across the board, we don't know. We don't know. Because they've studied that experiment for over 50 years and they know that it's not right. They know that it doesn't work. Why is it in the textbook? Why is it on PBS's website? Why is it in other places? If you keep reading, you'll find people that tell you the other side of the story, but not everybody does. And that's sad. Why? Because scientists also have a worldview that they're trying to protect. And so they don't tell the whole story. Nye, to give him credit in the debate, he was honest when he was asked, how did consciousness spring from matter? He said, don't know. This is a great mystery. Yes, it is. And then when he was asked, how did the atoms that created the Big Bang get there? He said, this is a great mystery. We don't know. So two big questions for science, and they're fundamental, they're foundational. Where did all the matter come from? We don't know. Well, that's a pretty big question. And how did life start? We don't know. Well, that's a pretty big question, too. To be making the assertions that they are. Nye also made these attacks against the Bible all through the debate. He kept saying this book, this English translation that's thousands of years old, implying that there are problems. But Nye really pulled back the curtain on his heart at one point. And I mentioned this to you earlier, but I want to remind you, he asked a question, and I think it sprang out before he realized what he was doing. He asked Ken Ham, he said, something that I've always found troubling. You believe that your worldview, a literal interpretation of most parts of the Bible, is correct. Well, what became of all those people who never heard of it, never heard of you or your worldview? Were they condemned? It's very troubling. Now, what he's doing at that point is he's revealing that his worldview is not just a scientific worldview. It's a theological worldview. He's thought a little bit about these things at least. And he's troubled by his understanding, or lack thereof, of the Bible. And part of his worldview springs from theological questions. His worldview is not just a scientific worldview. He also talked about predictability. He kept saying that Ham's model can't predict anything, but his can. His can predict things in the physical world, and then in geology and so forth. And so he makes the assumption that because it can predict geology or physics, that it's also predicting biology. And he says Ham's can't. Well, the Bible doesn't make scientific predictions. That's not what it was written to do. But the Bible does make predictions, doesn't it? Jesus made predictions. We call them what?
Prophecies.
Thank you. We call them prophecies, but we can call them predictions. I call mine a philosophy this morning. It's a little bit different. What did Jesus predict or prophesy? He predicted his manner of death. Some people might say, well, if you make enough political enemies, you can predict that you're going to be killed. What else did he predict? That he will come again. Of course, that one's not been fulfilled yet, so it's open-ended. Has he made any predictions or prophecies that we can say he was right about that?
Predicted some of the things his apostles did.
Okay. Can you think of something specific?
Well, he predicted what Peter did.
He predicted what Peter did.
Predicted what Judas did.
He predicted what Judas did. Some people might say, well, he was a really sharp guy, he understood psychology, and he could predict the movements of people that he was close to. Maybe. I think it's pretty impressive. You know, it's one thing to understand and predict the physical universe. But what is the most complex thing in all the world that we know of? Guys, you should be able to answer this question right away. What's that, Jaden? Human beings, especially women human beings.
Be careful, it's not.
I know. I'm on thin ice. The most complex thing in all of the universe is human personality. You think physics is complicated, and it is. You think biology is complicated, and it is. But it doesn't even hold a candle to what we call psychology. We're trying to understand the personality of an individual. And that's without even asking questions about spirituality, which I would say is on a higher level than just personality. So to predict what's going to happen in one person is one thing, Tommy, but to predict what's going to happen on a planet full of all these complex beings who, when you put two of them together, they're not just twice as complicated, they're about 100 times as complicated. If you don't think so, watch a man and a woman together. And then you throw in some kids, and it gets even more complicated. And then you put a tribe together, and it gets even more complicated. Then you put 2 or 3 tribes next to each other, and then a nation, and then a world. You see where I'm going? It's exceedingly complex. That's why history, students, is really so incredibly fascinating. I know we make it boring with all the names and the numbers, but history is a fascinating subject because that's what history is. And Jesus made some very definite prophecies or predictions about history. What were they? He said that poverty will always be with us. Now that may not seem like a big deal to you, but there's a lot of people today, and for a long time they've been predicting that we as a race can wipe out poverty. Who's right? So far. Jesus said that as long as people are on the planet, there will be wars and rumors of war. We've been told by humanists and their optimism that we will stop war. A war that started 100 years ago was called first what? Not saying that anybody in here is old enough to remember. The war to end all wars. Did it? In the next 100 years, there were more wars and more people killed than in all of human history combined. Who's right? Jesus or the atheistic, humanistic optimists? Jesus predicted that human government would continue to grow larger and larger, more and more powerful, more and more corrupt, until eventually there would be one world government. It hasn't happened yet, but what do you think? How could he predict that 2,000 years ago and be right in the world in which he lived? He predicted that religion will never come to an end. That to the very end, there will be religion. Atheists are telling us now that it's time for us to cast off the garment of religiosity and to move on to the adulthood of the race, which would be to give up our belief in God. So yes, there are some predictions, and Ken Ham mentioned this. He didn't go into any detail, but he mentioned prophecy, and Nye raised his eyebrow really well. It was impressive. He raised his eyebrow. He's got these big eyebrows. He was skeptical. But the world is skeptical of those things. Here's the problem with the predictions that are being made by science today. Based on evolution, science predicts that life would be what? You need to know this because this is important. This is right on the cutting edge of where we are. Here's an article that came out this week. These articles come out all the time. Astronomers discover sun's sibling that could host life containing planets. Did you know our sun had a brother? Or maybe it's a sister, I don't know, they don't say. Astronomers discover sun's sibling. Did you notice the second part of the title? That could host life containing planets. Researchers have found the sun's long-lost brother, didn't even know he was lost, which is believed to be born from the same cloud of gas and dust as our sun. Researchers said there's a small but not zero, notice this, small but not zero, chance that the newly discovered star could host planets that contain life. We want to know where we were born, said team leader Ivan Ramirez, an astronomer from the University of Texas at Austin, in a press release. If we can figure out in what part of the galaxy the sun formed, we can constrain conditions on the early solar system, listen to this, that could help us understand why we are here. I know, how did they make that jump? Did you notice what just happened? We just went from science to what? It's called philosophy. Just like that. And most of you didn't even notice it. Because we're used to it. Because they do it all the time. How does finding the sun's lost brother or sister tell us why we're here? Does anybody know? I'll give you the answer. It doesn't. Let's fill some stuff in and finish this up. Number 3. Atheistic naturalism. Here's the bottom line for atheistic naturalism. And it's not going to change anytime soon. Since God has no place in science, the appearance of design must be suppressed. They've already made up their minds. Many of them would not admit this, but it's true. They've already made up their mind that God doesn't exist, or they don't want to talk about God. And so because of that, since God has no place in science, the appearance of design, and they admit the appearance of design, they admit it's strong. Dawkins himself said, we have to suppress the appearance of design. And so I'm not putting words in their mouth when I write this sentence. I'm telling you what their community is saying, that the appearance of design has to be suppressed. By the way, in case any of you out there would like to see a debate where the Christian wins, hands down, and the one between Nye is good and it's interesting, but a lot of people said that Nye won the debate. But if you want to see a debate where the Christian wins, look up a debate between Richard Dawkins, who is a world-class atheist scientist, and so he's no schoolboy by any means. He debated a man named John Lennox, Lennox, on all of these same issues. And if you want to see a good debate where the Christian wins, and I would say wipes the floor up with Richard. And Richard he's pretty prolific. And John just tears him up. So look that up and listen to that. It's an interesting thing about that Hebrews 11 passage. Look at that again. It says in verse 3, by faith we understand that the tous ionas was created by a word of God. The tous ionas. Usually in the Bible, when it talks about the world, it's uses the word hakosmos. It sounds like the English word cosmos. But here it uses this word ionia, which usually is translated age. And it has an implication of time to it. And so really you could translate this verse that by faith we understand that by a word of God that ages were created by God. Not just the materials of the world, but time itself. The principles by which the world operates. Now that is significant, because what that tells us, now if it's hard for you to listen to this sort of thing, and I've really put you to sleep, I want you to wake up for the last 5 minutes, okay? Because here's the best part. This verse is implying something that's very, very important. Our world, the entire universe, operates on just a few very basic scientific principles. Strong and weak nuclear forces, electromagnetic force, force of gravity, and so forth. It's not important what they are. If you're interested in that, you can look it up and learn. But here's the point. What science never says is where those principles came from. Why does our universe operate based on principles? Who established those principles? Where did those laws come from, and why do they work? And why can they not be broken? Well, the answer to the question is God established those principles. And here's the reason that that's important. For the last many decades, there's been a battle back and forth between science and religion, and it's been a sort of a God of the gaps type of battle. Here's how it works. Science goes out and understands the world, which is what they're there to do, and they need to keep doing it. And I would never stop them. I love it. So they go out, they understand the world, and they come back, and they cross over from understanding the world into philosophy, and they start to say, now we know why something happens. And every time they say, now we know why something happens, they take it away from the other side. See, God didn't do that. That's ours. And the other side says, well, okay, that may be, but we don't understand these things still, and God did those things, and so God still exists. This is a dangerous, dangerous way to fight this battle, because science is going to continue to do what? Well, they're going to continue to do what they do best, because God gave us a mind and a curiosity and an ability to understand the world that He made and put us in it. We have the capability to understand the world that we're in, and we're going to continue to understand it more and more and more. If it gives us enough time, there's no telling what we'll understand about the world around us. What we understand now is astounding. And every time science says we understand that, they're going to take it away. And so they're talking about the gaps, the places that we don't understand. That's the only place where God exists. And if they keep squeezing and squeezing and squeezing, eventually what happens? God's gone. And then people like Stephen Hawking say, there's no room for God in the universe anymore. But he's wrong. Here's why. The God of gaps argument is absolutely the wrong way to think about it. Because it doesn't matter that we explain everything. If we could explain everything, we haven't. We're a long way away from it, by the way. 80% of the universe is called dark matter, which is just another way of saying we don't know what it is. 80% plus. But the God of the gaps argument is wrong. Let science explain everything, 100%. And God will still exist. Why? Because God made the rules by which all of those things work. There's no God of gaps. He's God of everything. Everything that science describes and understands is something that He is God of. So number 4 on your outline is this. Theistic creationism. Whether you believe the earth is young, old, or in between, God made it. Theistic creationism. Since God made the heavens and the earth, we're told that by the Bible, the appearance of design points to the designer. And what I'm saying here is both people are being both deductive and inductive. We both come to the table with pre-existing ideas, worldviews. We admit that. Ken Ham did a great job of admitting that in the debate. He said, I admit it. My worldview is based on the Bible. I start with the Bible. Nye didn't like that. Nye claimed that he doesn't have a worldview that he starts with, but he's wrong. He does have a worldview that he starts with. He's just not admitting it. Let me give you one other thing. On the back of this, by the way, and we don't have time to run through it, but it's from a previous message that many of you heard when we started in Genesis about 1.5 years ago. And a lot of really, really good answers are on that part of your outline. And if you want to listen to that message again, I'm sure you can find it and get the DVD for it or go online and listen to it. Every one of those sentences is still excellent today, and they fit right together with what we're saying. So you can study that, but I want to finish up with 2 things. First of all, I want you to understand this. A lot of people think that the universe is made out of matter and energy. But there's more to it than that. Remember this. The universe is made up of matter, energy, and information. Information. You cannot leave out information. If you leave out information, you leave out life. You leave out most of what's happening on planet Earth. And this is the explosion in scientific understanding that has re-energized so many creationists in the latter half of the 20th century and the first part of the 21st century is this idea of how we see information all around us, even to the most basic level of who we are in our DNA. The universe is not just made out of energy and matter. It's made out of energy, matter, and information. Remember that. Here's the last thing I want to give you. Number 5 on your outline. If you're struggling with these things or find yourself struggling with them in the future, if you'll do this, this will help you. And this is what's helped me navigate and chart the waters of this debate for many, many years now. But I love it. It challenges me a lot of times. One thing we can't do is just walk away from the world. Jesus won't let us do that. Keep the how, the why, and the who clear. If you'll keep those three things clear in your mind, you'll do a good job with this. Science discovers how. They do a good job, and they need to keep doing it. God's given us the mind and the curiosity and the ability. He's put a world together that's understandable. It's amazingly complex. It's beautiful. It's frightening. It's huge. It's powerful. But there it is. And we have the ability to go out and understand it. The Bible reveals why. When science starts telling you why, a whistle needs to go off in your spirit and say, wait a minute. We just crossed the line. Just like in that article I was reading you before. But it's done so often now that the fence has been broken down. We need to build it back again. Science discovers how, the Bible reveals why, and here's the most important part. God is the who, the both. It's not a God of the gaps. It's not God with the Bible and atheism with science. God is on both sides. He's the God of science, and He's the God of the Bible. The heavens and the earth are all His. Every pulsar, every black hole, if they actually exist, even though Stephen Hawking, who said they did, has now decided that they don't. And there's a great example of how science changes its mind about huge things in the universe. All of it's His. Well, I appreciate you listening. We'll go on to something new next Sunday night. So for those of you who have struggled through the science, yee-haw. You don't have to hear it for a while. A few weeks ago, we did a couple of Sunday nights on wives submit to your husbands. That was quite fascinating. And ladies, thank you. You were very thought-provoking and helped me out in my writing project. But I'm still writing. And next Sunday night, we're going to continue on. Does anybody want to take a guess at what the name of the next part of the series is? Well, I'll tell you. Well, I thought about calling it that, but I decided that I needed something a little bit more provocative. Up here they said, husbands, love your wives, and that is what the next part of that Ephesians 5 passage says. But here's the name of the title. Husbands, die for your wives. Okay? So we'll talk about that. God willing, next Sunday night. Let's pray together.